Good morning, and thank you for spending this beautiful summer day with us. It's a great honor to be here. Like many of you who are teachers, I'm faced with a morbidly obese curriculum. I have about 5,000 slides and less than an hour to share them with you. So I apologize in advance to the translators who by the end of the hour are going to rethink their vocational choice. There are a number of resources online that are available to you. At the inventtoloearn.com/stuff page are a lot of things that you can use in the classroom and to help you learn more about the maker movement and learning by making and constructionism. And if you want to know more about me, the second link will take you there. And when you walked in, you saw the 8 big ideas of constructionism from Seymour Papert. Those were created as part of my doctoral research, and it's been translated into lots of languages, and you can read the full document at that URL. So I was asked as I was running in here to define constructionism again. And constructionism is a play on the learning theory of constructivism. Constructivism is the learning theory that says that we learn by constructing knowledge within our heads, by connecting it connecting previous knowledge and experience to new contexts. We're able to learn, and that's a theory like gravity or climate change that's pretty well established that that's how learning occurs. Constructionism is a play on that idea. Papert worked with Piaget, helped Piaget understand how children learn mathematics in particular. And constructionism suggests that the best way to ensure that construction is by actively being engaged in creating something shareable that's perhaps outside of your head. That doesn't have to be an electric go-kart or a volcano. It could be a poem or a theory or a musical composition. But it's the idea that you're creating something that's shareable. And the notion here is that if you're engaged in the making of something, it's a efficient way of ensuring that that knowledge is being constructed. So I want to begin with a few major principles and then get into some talk about technology, and then how teachers can make sense of these new opportunities in their classroom contexts, and then talk about what if you were to do something radically different and share some examples from the work that I do with educators around the world. So the first idea is that schools have an obligation to introduce children to things they don't yet know they love. That's the only reason why school will remain viable into the future, is if we can answer the question of why do the kids even show up if they have cell phones and internet access and televisions and friends. How do we gain the greatest benefit from being co-located in the same space at the same time? I want to live in a world where kids wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a burning desire to get back to school, to continue working on something that matters to them, and their teachers wake up every morning and ask themselves, how do I make this the best 7 hours of a kid's life? And introducing children to things they don't yet know they love isn't the same as forcing them to do things they don't want to do. So I think coercion is the enemy of learning. It's the enemy of creativity. It's the enemy of democracy. One of the things that's exciting about the maker movement is there are kids who are at the center of it, who are heralded and respected and beloved and cherished, not just because they're cute, but because they know stuff, because they have demonstrable expertise. And they welcome the company of smart, caring adults, because adults have things that they don't have, perhaps wisdom, experience, cars, right? And they delight in the company of the adults, and the adults in the maker movement delight in their company as well. And one of the exciting things that happens is that these kids today are now trying on the role of engineer or scientist or entrepreneur in the same way that previous generations of children tried on fireman or nurse or astronaut or fairy princess. That it's a role they experiment with for a while and then move on perhaps except I think these experiences are seminal and help them view the world for the rest of their lives. The kid in the larger photo was Kane of Kane's Arcade. He became famous for making an arcade out of cardboard boxes. He got invited to the White House. He traveled all over the world. People raised $500,000 for a university for him. The city of Los Angeles gave him a cardboard key to the city. Tony Hawk took him skateboarding. And when he was 11, he announced he was retiring. And none of us have heard from him since. And I'm actually delighted by that he was able to do this thing for a while. It shaped him, but he wasn't tied to it. Another big idea, young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity. Young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity. And it's incumbent upon us as educators, as parents, as citizens, to build upon that capacity for intensity. Look at these children programming around 1992 in one of the early laptop schools where I worked. In the time that elapsed between hitting the return key and awaiting the result to appear on the screen, every ounce of that kid's being is mobilized in anticipation of the result. He's shaking with anticipation. And in that case, and in literally hundreds of classrooms around the world since, the same thing happened. A moment after I discover a kid like that, an adult, usually a teacher, takes me aside and whispers in my ear, "Yeah, that kid's not very good at school." And I diagnose that now as an acute intensity imbalance. There's a difference between his sense of himself, his ability as a learner, the material and the tools and the technologies and the milieu in which he lives, and the pace and the expectations of the classroom that don't match what he's capable of doing. So making is a stance. It's a way of looking at the world with the confidence and competence to say that I can solve any problem, even if only to discover I need to learn a lot more to be able to solve it. The best thing we can do as educators, as professors, as parents, is prepare our children to solve problems that we ourselves can't even imagine, that we can't even anticipate. But let's say you're a perfect school, where the children love being there and there's lots of play and creativity and autonomous projects and collegiality between children and each other and children and teachers, and it's open to the community. What does making add that's different? I think the first thing is enhanced expressiveness. What I mean by that is, if in the past you can build a robot out of cereal boxes, but now your robot made out of cereal boxes can also sing or dance or send a text message to your grandmother, why wouldn't you let a kid do that? The second is precision and reliability. This isn't just following directions correctly or measuring and cutting precisely, although it can be those things. It's the practice of creating reliably reproducible phenomena. Meaning, I make something, whether it's in code or it's off the computer with my hands, and it works now, it works after lunch, it may even work a week from now. That's an experience that very few kids have had that's critical to engineering and the arts and almost any other pursuit. We have the ability to make real things. When you can make real things, the learning is more authentic. It sticks with you, you own it. And we make complexity accessible. We're allowing kids to learn and do and know in ways and explore domains that were unimaginable just a couple of years ago. And I like to say that the best makerspace is between your ears. Paolo and I are old friends and colleagues, and we look at different parts of the practice. He's involved in creating large, grand, expensive fab labs where children go occasionally to work on some project. I want the idea of making to be in every corner of the school, every minute of the school day. So that's a makerspace in a kindergarten after they cleaned up. This is a makerspace in New York City where this teacher fundraised. She begged and borrowed to buy 2 plastic tables so that at lunchtime her classroom becomes a makerspace where 75 children typically give up their lunch to make things. When we think about the technology, we should recognize that it's never neutral. Lots of times people say, oh, it's just technology, or it's up to the teacher, or it's not really true. Technology is always designed with an intent. It always influences behavior and bestows agency. So we have to decide what is our worldview. Do we believe that computers are for the system, for the teacher, or for the learner? Constructionists believe that we want the greatest return on investment and that our focus should be on the learner. That if we invest the resources and we use technology that amplifies the potential of each learner, that's an intellectual laboratory and vehicle for self-expression, we have the greatest impact. And this triangle is important because some technologies can be dragged from one of these constituents to another, from one corner to another, by a really clever person. But by and large, the technology you choose bestows agency on one part of the system. So if you're interested in surveillance and grading and measuring, then the computer is for the system. If you buy an interactive whiteboard, your model of education is classroom as theater, teacher as actor, computer as prop, students as audience. So that bestows agency on the teacher. Oh, and by the way, and I said to Christoph yesterday, the schools in the United States are finding out they can't even throw away their whiteboards because they're like Chernobyl. They're filled with things that you can't recycle or break down. Or you're talking about having technology that's in the hands of the learner or in the pockets of the learner all the time. So we're in a moment where there's kind of three technological game changers, sets of technology that are potentially changing the way we live and think and learn. The first is fabrication. Until recently, the only thing you can make on a computer lived on the screen or was spit out on paper. Now you can make real things. But the power of 3D printing isn't that every child in the 7th grade can make a Star Wars keychain. It's that for the first time in history, kids have access to the Z-axis, that they can work in 3D, and perhaps most importantly, for the first time ever, you can make the part you need, when you need it, where you need it, even if no one else on earth ever will need such a thing. Physical computing, the idea that we're adding interactivity and intelligence to everyday objects by putting circuitry in cloth and in paper and in ceramic and in wood, and we're connecting it with microcontrollers, microprocessors that can make decisions about the stimuli it receives and then do things. This is a very important area that's finally becoming widely accessible to children. One thing I want to point out is I don't want to hear anyone today telling me that this is unaffordable. I was in Italy a couple of months ago, and I finally determined that a Raspberry Pi, which is a full quad-core computer, costs roughly the price of a pack of cigarettes. 3 microbits are the price of a pack of cigarettes. We can't afford to not do these things. We need a sense of urgency. There have been microcomputers in schools around the world now for 40 years. That's 2 generations of children, and we're still thinking about studying the problem. The last area is computer programming, not because it may lead to a high-paying job, but because it gives you agency over an increasingly complex and technologically sophisticated world. Because when you program the computer, it may be the first time, as it was in my life at 12 years old, where I felt smart, where I was in charge, where I felt creatively expressive. And this is a photograph of Bill Gates and Paul Allen at around the same time, having the same quality of experience. It also is important because it answers the question that Seymour Papert began asking a half-century ago: does the computer program the child or the child program the computer? This is a question that's fundamental to democracy. It's fundamental to a time where leaders are saying the truth isn't the truth. So having the ability to control the system is incredibly critical for children, all children, across the curriculum. Seymour Papert, my friend and colleague of many years, said that if you can make things with computers, you can make more interesting things, you can learn a lot more by making them. We're adding colors to the crayon box. And if we're talking about learning in 2018 and beyond, modern knowledge construction is inseparable from computing. There is no learning without computing. I began working in schools where every kid had a laptop in 1989. It's almost 30 years ago. And we're still arguing over whether kids should have access to computers. It's unacceptable. The biggest idea of all, as far as I'm concerned, comes from Jean Piaget. And this idea frames all of my work when I think about learning, when I think about teaching, even when I think about curriculum design or assessment. Piaget taught us that knowledge is a consequence of experience. Knowledge is the result of experience. Paulo's work has indicated that if you have the experience before the lecture, there's deeper understanding. My experience suggests that in most cases, the experience can replace the instruction. And to the extent that we think there are problems in education, I think it's that the schools are too often devoid of experience. There is no substitute for it. When the same tools, materials, techniques, and processes are found in the art atelier, the auto shop, and the physics laboratory, then we can stop sorting children into winners and losers. We're blurring the artificial boundaries between subjects. We're decimating the distinctions between disciplines. And perhaps most importantly, for the first time in history, we can get rid of the destructive idea that some children should go into a vocational path and others are capable of thinking. Because we've overvalued learning with one's head, and the future requires learning with one's heart, head, and hands equally. This isn't just about helping children who haven't been good at school, who are good with their hands, be more academically successful. This is a direct threat and challenge to kids who are good at school, who are compliant, who do well on tests, who are going to enter a world in which they're going to be required to solve problems that you haven't taught them how to solve. Many of those problems are going to be solved by making something, either with code or with their hands. I have 3 university-educated adult children. The only one who has lived on her own since the minute she graduated, with a job, with health insurance, with a steady paycheck, was the art major. I'm reasonably confident there are very few school guidance counselors telling children this. I have 2 friends who are television show carpenters. I don't mean they make things for television shows, I mean they make things on television shows. Pete Nelson, a treehouse master, is a friend and colleague of mine. He probably makes 7 figures a year building tree houses on TV. I'm pretty sure that while he was getting his economics degree, no one told him this was possible. The world is going to be a different place. That's why places like MIT have added a maker portfolio to their undergraduate admissions application process. The best math and science institution in the world wants to know, what can you do? Not just that you like maths and you have good test scores. Show us evidence that you're curious, that you're persistent, that you have ingenuity, that you have social capital, that you're willing to learn something without a gun to your head or a grade dangled out in front of you. Alan Kay, the inventor of the personal computer, said that technology is anything that wasn't there when you were born. This stuff isn't hard and worthy of study. It's part of our world, and we have to help kids use it in more constructive ways. This is my grandson at about 18 months old, when anything that was slightly rectangular in shape was a cell phone. We really confused him with the old Fisher-Price phone with the handset and the creepy eyes. But kids come to us with new expectations, and the tools and materials that are available to us are wholly consistent with the best principles of early childhood education, of developmental psychology. This is the robot petting zoo at a maker fair about 5 or 6 years ago, where parents waited for their children to spend a couple minutes in a pen with robots that beeped and burped and squawked and blew bubbles. And if you watch the children interact with the robots, their behavior was indistinguishable from had those been real animals at a fair. Here's a 2-year-old playing with little bits. Little bits are snapped together electronic elements that use rare earth magnets to make the connections so that syntax errors are impossible. There's no way to destroy an element. There's no way to short it out or hurt someone. There's no way that this was intended for 2-year-olds. And yet, this woman who was in one of my workshops shared this video with me of her 2-year-old playing with them. Sound?
Yeah.
Just again.
Okay. Oh, it's doing it a little bit. I can
So
see
she has a potentiometer that she's using to adjust the amount of voltage going through the circuit that's outputting to a
just doing a tiny
vibrating motor like you would have in your cell phone.
Let's just press this.
Watch this, watch this.
This. And let's just press this.
Oh! That's funny.
So she's being an engineer. And we think of engineering as the concrete manifestation of theoretical principles. You have some idea, you communicate it to the materials. If you're successful, you decorate, you embellish, you ask a deeper question, you test a larger hypothesis. If you're unsuccessful, you debug or you redefine the project. What's going to happen when she gets to school and is told to stay on the rug or to memorize 50 facts about cats? If we provided these kinds of engineering experiences for children, they would learn the existing curriculum better, and they would have a better attitude towards STEM subjects. We need to abandon some of our prejudices and go into classrooms every day with an open heart and open mind. No one could have told me that if I brought drones into classrooms, girls would knock boys over to get at them. There is no one at any of the drone companies who thinks girls like drones. They're wrong. And then there's this other fabulous piece of technology that boys don't get to touch, called the sewing machine. So if we stop thinking about this is for them and this is for the other thems, there's an opportunity to engage everyone in a much richer learning experience. This is one of my favorite projects. 2 5th-grade boys, about 10 years old, built a marimba out of PVC pipe and wood. They composed music for it, they could perform the music on it. But what really impressed me wasn't even that or the carpentry and engineering involved in it. They explained to me that the way you figure out how to make the note you want is by finding out its numerical frequency and using a calculation that based on the frequency and the diameter of the tube, you can figure out how long to cut the tube. And they said that while we were capable of doing that mathematics, we were concerned that our classmates couldn't, and we wanted them to participate. Which was a lovely bit of empathy or hubris, I'm not sure which. What they did next took my breath away. They wrote a program in Scratch that asks you what's the frequency you want, how fat is the tube, and it tells you where to cut the tube. Now, when we think of computer programming, we always think of the result, the artifact, being a computer program. In this case, the result was a marimba. Programming was instrumental to making an instrument. And you couldn't have done this without a computer. And after all the adults told these children how brilliant they were, I went up to them and I said, you know, we've got all these papers you printed off the internet of tables of frequencies. And they said, yeah. And I said, this is about music, right? They said, yeah. And I said, how come I can't type F# into the program? And in unison, they grabbed their laptop, ran away, and said, oh, and disappeared. And then I was getting updates from their teacher for a while after about how they were improving the program so that you could communicate with it musically as opposed to numerically. Now, I run a lot of workshops in a lot of places around the world. I flew about 400,000 K last year. And that allows me to see patterns and have different perspectives. But where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought for a second. Oh yeah, I meet a lot of teachers who say to me, you know, I got all this stuff, it's so amazing. The kids are so clever, they do all these cool things, and I don't even need to know anything. Sometimes I ask, you know, it would be even better if you knew something. Because then you could answer a question, connect them to a resource that might be useful to them, throw a well-timed obstacle in their way that would lead to the next major intellectual development. The reason why I was able to help the kids make that program was because of 2 things. I knew it was possible to write that program because I've done a lot of programming myself. And 2, I knew it was possible for them to write that program because I've done a lot of teaching. And I believe in the power and the competence of children. I knew it was within their zone of proximal development, was within reach of them. If we make simple things easy to do, we make complexity possible. When the learner's able to know what they need to know when they need to know it, they're capable of doing much greater things. And we have tools that act as prosthetics that allow us to amplify human potential. So if I'm using free, terrific software like Turtle Art, where you can make beautiful images by writing simple computer programs, you can help a 7th grade humanities teacher who wanted to turn her vacation photos of Moroccan tiles into a math activity. And then a 4th grade teacher sees this and says, I can do this during my Islamic studies unit, and we're doing Islamic tiling patterns, but we'll program them in Turtle Art, we'll open them in a 3D design package like Tinkercad and turn the 2D image into a 3D image by extruding it, because then we can send it to a 3D printer, make these lovely cookie cutters, which we can play with clay. But if we give the kids ceramic clay, and they stamp them, and we fire them, and they hand paint them, we end up with these extraordinarily beautiful, mathematically complex works of art. And what I love about this project is 3 things. 1, it goes from digital to the analog. It goes from something on a screen to something we can hold in our hands. The second is that it goes from mathematics to art. You know, some of you may have had a maths teacher who had a Escher poster yellowing in the back of the room, and if you asked, why is that there, they would mumble something about there being math in the art. Or holding up a pine cone and telling the kids that that's math. But here, you couldn't have created anything this beautiful, this sophisticated without using mathematics. And the third thing of all is that in the 2 minutes it took me to share this with you, you know how to do it yourself. So I think the smallest unit of a teacher's concern should be a project. The skills that we want kids to develop emerge from being involved in projects. I'm concerned with what's the smallest seed I can plant as a teacher that grows the biggest tree, the most beautiful garden. What's the least that I can do that produces the greatest result? So I was working in a school in a poor rural area in America, and they were interested in this idea of learning by making. And they had this thing in a hallway, which I thought was a museum piece. But it was actually a vending machine that sells poor children pencils. So I was so offended by this, I suggested that maybe their whole school begin the year by asking kids to make silly vending machines, preposterous vending machines. So a couple weeks later, I was doing a workshop for teachers, and I said, we have microcontrollers and sensors and motors and lights. I'd like you over the next hour and a half or 2 hours to make a vending machine. Craft materials, recycled junk. Because if you make something that does that, it's a vending machine. If 2 came out, there's a bug. Maybe I wanted to buy 2. What if you want to be able to choose a blue one or a red one? What if you want to have it be coin operated? Which coins? How does it detect bad coins? Does it make change? Should it use PayWave or use a credit card? So everyone knows what a vending machine is. They can bring their expertise, their imagination, their knowledge to the problem and make something that's developmentally appropriate for them. In this workshop with teachers, one of the groups of teachers had a stuffed giraffe toy, like a soft giraffe. And they decided their vending machine would vomit gumballs. The giraffe would throw up gumballs. And they very quickly discovered that puking gumballs was hard, but pooping them was relatively easy. And that was funny until they started discussing evolutionary biology. And asking questions like, oh, I wonder if that's why babies don't come out your mom's head. And maybe gravity is involved. The most clever curriculum authors in the universe couldn't have anticipated that we could have gone from make a vending machine to evolutionary biology in 90 minutes and had programming, engineering, and everything else in between. So as I mentioned before, it's our responsibility to prepare kids to solve problems they haven't anticipated before. And we have to help them develop technological fluency. Seymour Papert said that the scandal of education is that every time you teach something, you deprive a child of the pleasure and benefit of discovery. I want to tell another story. I was working in a primary school in Los Angeles, and most of my responsibility was to wander into classrooms and say, hey, what are you doing? And then maybe suggest that teachers try something a different way. And early on in the school year, I ran into 4 kindergarten teachers of 5-year-olds, who were having a very serious conversation in the hallway. Excuse me. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, we're planning our B unit, B-E-E. I said, oh, tell me about your B unit. They said, well, we tell the kids about bees, we read stories about bees, we sing songs about bees, we watch movies about bees, and then for the culminating activity, we put out recycled materials, art supplies, craft stuff, and we ask the kids to make a bee. And I said, flip it upside down, turn it upside down. They said, what do you mean? I said, tomorrow morning, put out the arts and craft supplies, put out the recycled materials and junk, and ask the kids to make a bee. I had a couple of goals in mind. One was, they will find out that kids know things. And I want teachers to view themselves as researchers, as we learn from the educators of Reggio Emilia, Italy, that it's our primary responsibility to be researchers, to make private thinking public, to make invisible thinking visible. You know what's one of the biggest problems with grading and exams? Is it makes teachers lazy. They don't have to know their students. They don't have to understand their thinking. They don't have to have a sense of their misconceptions and their passions and desires and talents. But back to the bees. While I was having this conversation with the teachers for 2 minutes, an amazing thing happened. The principal of the school walked by, and she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm turning bees upside down. And she said, good, they've been doing that shit for 20 years. Now, that's a great moment of liberation. There's a great reminder that a lot of the stuff we do that we hate is our idea, that we're our own worst oppressor. So these teachers were terrific. The next day, they put all the stuff out. They asked the kids to make bees. They were so excited by the result, you had to peel them off the ceiling. And there were kids who understood pollination, and there were some kids who just put jetpacks and roller skates on bees. And those were invitations for creative writing activities. But what the teachers learned was what I wanted them to learn, which was the Piagetian idea that it's not the job of the teacher to correct the child from the outside, but to create the conditions by which they correct themselves from the inside. That because then when they watched movies about bees and sang songs about bees or read stories about bees and were told facts about bees, the kids would go off and make their bees better. Their sense of bee-ness would improve. And thank God I didn't bother to ask why they teach bees at the beginning of kindergarten. I kind of assumed it's a second letter of the alphabet, maybe that's why. Because when I asked them, they told me that they used bees as a metaphor for the social organization of kindergarten. And when I went home and I mentioned that, thank you. When I went home and I mentioned that to my wife, she said, you mean like you work slavishly to please the queen and then you die? I said, yeah, that's apparently kindergarten. So here are some of the bees they made. I was in another school recently. I'll just quickly tell this story. And I was introduced to a bunch of 5th or 6th grade girls who entered a competition and they made an award-winning app. The app was okay. The programming was pretty good. But I asked the kids a couple of questions. I said, what else have you made? And they just stared at me. And then I asked, and what would you like to make next? And in unison, they turned to the teacher. So, great, they won a stupid contest. They didn't learn anything. They certainly don't own any of the knowledge that they developed. In the same school, the kids were involved in this elaborate planning for a pneumatic unit. They had to plan and make sketches and designs and figure out what parts they were going to need. But then they were given kits. So I don't know what all the planning was about. And they built the kits, and they finished the kits. And then they had to do what we always make kids do. They had to make a brochure. Because you always have to make a brochure. Why? Because the teachers are too insecure to defend the activity as being educationally valuable, and they're unable to articulate what the children understood and learned by looking at the artifact and watching the interactions between the children. So we engage in this cover our backside activity of making the kids do some fake work at the end of it. And the reason why I object to that most is, what's the scarcest resource in school? Time. Time. So that time they were wasting making this stupid brochure, they could have been building a better machine, testing a larger theory, making something else, learning something else. And then it occurred to me that their entire pneumatic unit could have been replaced by putting 4 scraps of paper in a hat that said, push something, pull something, lift something, throw something. And if you had given the kids a chance to pull one of those lottery tickets and then had materials available for them, they would have learned more than they did through this carefully designed lesson. We should remember that there's nothing virtuous about failure. There are books being written by people who buy them in airport gift shops about getting rich that say we have to embrace failure. When kids are skateboarding, they don't talk about failing. Just stuff happens. Papert taught me that the best projects push up against the persistence of reality. It's okay. We'll figure out some way around it. But failure is a term that's used for judgment. When we can't possibly remediate a term that's used to punish children as a way to motivate them. We have to create real experiences for kids. So if we ask 3-year-olds to build a park for the birds who come to visit, they know what to do. And then if the kid says, why don't we make it an amusement park? And they say, and we brainstorm that there's places to eat, places to rest, rides, water features, the kids can go back and continue evolving and working on that project. But this is a way of making the world a better place, rather than them giving them a worksheet on Martin Luther King's birthday that says, how would you make the world a better place? And every kid writes, I would be nice. How do we do this? I like to say a good prompt is worth 1,000 words. When you have a good prompt, challenge, problem, or motivation, appropriate materials, sufficient time, and a supportive culture that includes a range of expertise, including the students, we can solve problems that are bigger than ourselves. So this is a video, probably 10 years old now, of a school I helped open in South Korea. 3rd graders were using a robotics set, and I told them I want to push the go button and have something go from the starting line and land as close to the finish line as possible. That was it. Watch the kids. Now, YouTube is filled with 3rd-year engineering students at the world's best engineering colleges doing the exact same thing. I didn't say what it had to look like, how much it had to weigh. We didn't have to decide who the customers were. We didn't have to make a brochure afterwards. The experience itself was powerful. So how do we do this if we want to design curriculum for kids? I think there are 3 elements of a good prompt. The first is brevity. It should fit on a Post-it note. You know a Post-it note? Or a t-shirt. Ambiguity. You don't want to overly define what it has to be. I said it has to go from the starting line and as close to the finish line as possible. If they made something that launched into space, circumnavigated the globe, and landed on the finish line, then they exceeded my expectations. And the third is immunity to assessment. What do I mean by that? I mean, to the extent that you have to assess kids, they couldn't care less about it. That's your problem, not theirs. That the work matters to them. Sometimes as a teacher, we just need to be able to ask a good and then question. And then? Why does it fall down? Well, how would you like to improve it? What would you do next? What else would you like to make? We could fake our way through kids' projects that way. But we can also gain a lot of benefit from looking at the problems from different perspectives. Sometimes we're forced to do this because we have a limited amount of material. So not every kid can work with the same sets at the same time. So period 1 has to do one thing, period 2 has to do a different thing, and you have to figure out how to schedule it. Or if everyone is working with the same materials, one group of kids can climb a ramp, another group of kids can go down a ramp, another group of kids can make something that goes fast, another group of kids can make something that goes slow. And when the kids pass each other in the hallway and talk at lunch, they'll learn from each other, even though they had slightly different experiences. When we work with teachers, we'll bring a box of hummingbird robot controllers and motors, lights, and sensors, and we'll program in Scratch or Snap. And with beginners, teachers who have never used a computer before, we could ask them, can you make a bird? Singing and dancing is appreciated. And within 90 minutes to 2 hours, I've done this 100 times now on almost every continent except Antarctica, a group of teachers, regardless of their experience level, will make birds. And they'll download music and they'll choreograph their birds to the music and they'll dance themselves. Or they'll make noise-activated birds. They'll turn rotational motion of a motor into wings flapping. These are teachers who often don't have a working understanding of inequality. If you ask them about greater than or less than, they scrunch up their face and say, is the crocodile's mouth this way or that way? That's kind of their level of understanding. And yet they can do this in 90 minutes or 2 hours. This is a group of teachers from Guadalajara, Mexico, who made a robot bird, an opera bird. Now, no one in there is talking about failure. And one of the things that I learned is sometimes when we present these materials to schools, they look intimidating. They are kind of scary if you've never seen them before. But the feathers give us courage. If I bring a kilo of feathers with the electronics and some coffee cups and pipe cleaners, then all of a sudden, this is a potential bird. And again, if you compare this to the traditional model of teacher education or professional development, you would go through a 2-year course to be able to do something as sophisticated as teachers are doing on their introductory experience. So making isn't just about STEM. We want kids to be scientists rather than being taught science. We want them to be historians rather than being taught history. We want them to be musicians rather than being taught about music. We can manipulate DNA now. When I remember DNA as 3 letters representing 3 words that I can't remember or pronounce, and that squiggly thing. If I was a 7th grader who could manipulate DNA, I bet you I would understand it better than I do. And we can't behave as if the children are competent if we believe their teachers are incompetent. So, in my work with teachers, including a summer institute that I run each year where teachers spend 4 days in a radically different kind of environment, they engage in a great deal of hard fun. So let me share a couple of these examples. And I want to say that constructing modern knowledge, I think, is one of the truest, purest ideas, representations of constructionism, because we're completely uncompromising in what that means. We're not trying to make the curriculum a little more constructionist. We're not trying to make the test a little less nasty. Our participants go through a predictable emotional arc. Over 4 days, we tell them at the beginning, the first day you're going to be exhausted, you might feel stupid. The second morning you may hate yourself. But I promise you, if you stick it out until 1:03 p.m. on the second day, everything will start to click, you'll feel successful, and you'll be worried that it's going to end too soon. And sure enough, everyone goes over that roller coaster. So we begin with simple symbolism. When you walk into our institute, there's a screen that's not beautiful like this setup. It's made out of butcher paper or giant poster notes. So immediately you get the sense of, oh, if we need to solve a problem, we should do it. We should be self-reliant. We ask them to make a name badge. We don't have people printed them out on computer and a secretariat. We have some craft materials that people can make a name badge that they love. Then we ask, what would you like to make? We don't say, I want to learn Photoshop. We ask, what would you like to make? And sometimes people have very practical ideas, and sometimes they say things like, I would like to make an internet for chickens, or massaging shorts, A gentleman said that a couple of years ago when I dropped the microphone, boom. And he came up to me later and he said, "You made my idea sound dirty." And I said, "With all due respect, sir, you did say massage shorts." And we write them all down around the room, and then we ask people to get pens and write down their name under any project they think they're interested in. They can write their name under 100 if they want, but with anything they're interested in. This is a way of them walking and thinking about what the options are. And then we say, if you're really passionate about a project idea, take a piece of paper, write it down on it, and hold it over your head, and be a beacon. You're not a leader, you're not responsible for anything, but if other people want to work with you, they'll find you. And if not, you can figure out what else to do. And from then on, there is no more instruction. And this is the first encounter the educators had this year with our learning environment. When they walked into the giant space, a room about 2.5 times this size, it was flat of course, and filled with 60 cases of materials, electronics, 500 books, etc. They took their breath away, and then they just get down to business. They just start working and planning different ways. And then on the last day, in the last afternoon, we ask them to share their projects. And we don't put on a show. Some of the projects are too big to move. Some of them are too precarious to move. And they've been seeing what people are doing all week. So the point isn't the product as much as it is the process. We ask if there's 4 people in your group, half of you go look around while the other half demonstrate, and then we'll swap. The night before, we keep the lab open until 1 or 2 in the morning for people who want to continue working on their projects. They don't want to sleep. They want to do it. It's got a celebratory feel to it. And you see, this was a robot that mixed cocktails. Large space, lots of activity. Some of the powerful ideas. Space is important. Comfort is important. I was just at the University of Vilnius all week, sitting in medieval classrooms. The word in Lithuanian for classroom is auditorium. It tells you about what the metaphor for learning is. That the teacher's a performer and the students are just passive spectators. In incredibly uncomfortable chairs that nearly killed people during every session. This is an interesting photo as well. The kid in the middle is 18 years old. He just graduated high school. I met him when he was 11 and got famous on YouTube for a viral video he made called "Why I Love My 3D Printer." And he's as nutty as can be, and he's on the autism spectrum, and he knows everything. And all week long, we heard teachers say, "I think we need to escalate to Skylar." And he was an invaluable part of our faculty. And I hired him. In fact, most of the other people at CMK work for free. He got paid. He was worth the investment because I wanted teachers to understand that they have such potential in their classrooms, in every one of their classrooms. There are kids who know stuff, who can make valuable contributions. The stuff is incredibly important. It inspires our projects. It's what we need to solve a problem. So we have a rich environment that's filled with anything we could possibly ever need or find useful. I was inspired by Thomas Edison as a child, and he said that in his laboratory, he wanted everything from the hide of an elephant to the eyeballs of a United States senator, just in case it came in handy. They spend time with their guest speakers. This is 2 young Australian teachers working on an electronics project with Carlo Rinaldi, the genius behind the Reggio Emilia approach for the last 40 plus years. Interacting with their heroes, who don't just talk to them, but sit with them, and speak with them and eat with them. And the key element of this is literally no prizes, no grades, no judgment, no coercion, no competition, and no instruction. They learn without being taught. That doesn't mean they don't ask for help and we make a suggestion or we ask a well-timed question of them in the context of solving a problem. But there is no more lecture at the event. And let me just say something about grades and competitions. I know this stuff is very popular in this part of the world. When you introduce competition, there is science to demonstrate that it's a pretty good predictor that girls will lose interest. Now, you can all tell me about some girl who won some competition, but that doesn't disprove what I'm saying. And as my friend Alfie Kohn likes to say, the only thing worse than a reward is an award. Because it not only gets motivation wrong and it's behaviorism, but it's behaviorism at the expense of other people. So if I have 2 more minutes, I want to share a couple more projects. This is a group of teachers who use makey-makeys and conductive thread to draw a digestive system and a circulatory system on a t-shirt. So when they pointed to a place on their body, they close a circuit, and an animation in Scratch tells you about that anatomical system. Or a music teacher demonstrating the harp she made out of conductive thread and a luggage trolley. Or a robot that waters a plant when it gets thirsty. And once they determined the distance that the nails needed to be apart that measure the resistance in the soil, they sketched and 3D printed a nail separator, a part that no one ever except them needs. A year earlier, these teachers would have looked at a 3D printer as something impossible. They just did it. A dress that responds to music or noise. And this is a great bit of engineering and computer science and design. But they also made a dress. They did the whole thing. They didn't just build a part of the thing. They were able to play the whole game. Group of teachers last year wanted to make a tricycle out of cardboard that an adult could ride. I don't know why. But it turns out to be a remarkable feat of material science to do so. Microbits. Some of you were experiencing these yesterday. Low-cost microcontrollers.
So
a group of teachers this year used a number of
each other. So we've set a radio network, and now we're good to go.
As
we hadn't put that
controls for a marionette.
So there you go.
That one's already set.
So there's 6 or 8 microbits being communicated to by the one in his hands, and they built a marionette. And there's simple machines and mechanical advantage and programming and design and everything else in there.
Is not working.
2 years ago, 5 days after Pokemon Go came out, you remember everyone was walking around staring at their phones, and the media was telling us how the smartest computer scientists in the world had created this revolutionary software. Teachers at CMK said, we want to make Pokemon Go. The voice in my head said, stop them, they're going to fail. My heart and my experience said, keep your mouth shut. Maybe they'll succeed. If they don't succeed, they'll modulate their expectations and do something equally meaningful. Well, someone came along and said, anyone seen Tailblazer? It's a version of Scratch that runs on phones. It has a GPS block in it. If you have a block-based programming language with a GPS block, you can make your own Pokemon Go in a couple of days. So in a 7-day period, we went from the smartest computer scientists in the world doing it to classroom teachers doing it. Seymour Papert once said that everyone needs a prosthetic. Right? About 40% of you are wearing eyeglasses. No one accuses you of cheating. We develop technology all the time that helps us do what we do better. Group of teachers last year made Fitbit shoes. They count your steps, and when you reach your goal, there's a little light-up dance party to celebrate. These aren't a prototype. They're working shoes. You'll see there the lights are. Or when you want to make a drone, propulsion is hard, so let's just use helium balloons and a hotel television remote control. And just a couple vignettes from the Institute last month before I end. This was tweeted out by teachers. They wanted to make a system that would sort trash. And so they drop a ball of a different color, the machine sorts it. This is beginners. This was done in a little over 3 days. This is when you don't believe that teachers are incompetent, but you believe that they are competent, and you create the conditions in which that can be demonstrated. Here's a beautiful machine that paints an image on a vertical surface, programmed by teachers, created by teachers. This project takes my breath away. These teachers said, when we were doing the brainstorming of project ideas, I would like to make a Marie Antoinette wig that comes to life. Who thinks like that? Well, little children do, but okay. So they made this spectacular wig. It has an accelerometer, the behavior changes when you move your head. There's a straw that when she blows on it, bees shoot out of her head.
What the lights isn't working?
I mean, that's as close to STEAM as you're ever going to see. There's a large collection of these videos made by the participants that you can look at your leisure. And let me just even say something about that. We don't have e-portfolios for them. I don't keep track of their projects. I get a Vimeo account. I give them all the same username and password. And I say, if you want to share your project in some way, upload it to this site. And we've got a library of 100 projects or so. I don't have to do it. They can do it. And we can make it as simple and inexpensive as possible. This was a lovely photo that was tweeted. Two brothers, they teach in schools on different parts of the world, and they came together with their tattoos, and they were working with a sewing machine for the first time. This teacher said that when she got exhausted, she took a break to use and took all the recycled 3D printing waste and turned it into a beautiful hat. You know, what do we do when our kids are exhausted? When do they get to get a cup of coffee? When do they get to take a deep breath or go for a walk when they need to think about something? When we're telling them, go, 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 stay on task, eyes up front. When we're using technology now to let us know if they're watching or not, if they're paying attention or not. It's only a short distance before we electrocute them if they don't have their eyes on a teacher. Or a young teacher who says the best day of her life was spending time with one of her heroes. Or a group that decided to work on an invention called the shoeber. That if you have shoes, then when you click your heels together, it calls a taxi. And she's thanking the kid who helped her. Well, I'm going to end in 1 minute, but watch this young teacher. What's your name?
Tasha,
And where are you from?
Gilmore City in Iowa,
And what do you teach?
3-year-old preschool.
And how did you feel on Tuesday?
I felt like the world was ending.
And how do you feel now?
Amazing.
The dress did things when you move your hips. She teaches 3-year-olds. What do you think professional development is typically like for people who teach 3-year-olds? I'm sure it treats them like they're 4-year-olds. It doesn't say you can make and program interactive clothing. So, when we have uncompromising constructionism, a lack of coercion, an absence of instruction, access to expertise, and a belief in teacher competence and creativity, that leads to confidence, competence, courage, change. What about the curriculum? Well, so there's stuff we have to teach, right? Like fractions. That's a piece of nonsense we torture children with for several years. I got so upset by a school I was working in where they had written on the board, learn numerator and denominator. It had been up there so long you could no longer erase it. You're either going to have to throw the board out or chip it off. And I said, that's it. The first kid who writes a program in Logo that lets me type any fraction in, and I mean hard fractions, and draws me a representation of that fraction as part of a circle, I'll take you out to lunch. Wasn't sure if I was allowed to do that. 3 10-year-old girls 2 days later handed me this program. This is 2 years of the curriculum. Finished, knocked off, understood better in 2 days. All the damn curriculum wanted to know from these kids is if they could remember which was the top word and which was the bottom word. If they flipped a coin in the air, they would be accurate more often. Here, there was at least some understanding. And it took 2 days instead of 2 years with better results. So the idea that projects or constructionism is inefficient, I think, is wrong. If it leads to understanding, it's more efficient. A boy in Australia, his teachers came to me, they shared this project. They told me he had very low literacy skills, but he called himself a steampunk, and he could do all these wonderful things with his hands, like this. So let's review. That's compressed gas, open flame, really sharp objects. Because what could possibly go wrong? And these teachers told me, and their principal, over and over again, that he had very low literacy skills. As if to say, yeah, but he's good with his hands, so he'll be okay. And call me a crazy radical, but I'm pro-literacy. I think literacy is a good thing. In my experience with at-risk learners is that we can help take what they're not hot about and warm up the things that warm it up so that they have deeper understanding. So I asked a couple of simple questions. Does your school subscribe to any computer magazines? I work in schools with 2,000 computers, not a single book or magazine about computers in the library. Never occurred to anyone that a kid might want to read something. I asked, do you subscribe to Make magazine or Hackspace, any of the maker materials? Has he read Jules Verne? My experience with at-risk kids is if a kid calls himself a steampunk, he'll read 19th century science fiction. And when he starts reading 19th century science fiction, he'll catch up to his classmates in a couple of days. So I wonder if deep learning is possible. When do kids become great at something? How do we create the conditions where we honor their obsession? Whether it's to learn to play a B flat on a trumpet better and spending years on that, or just wanting to know every species of dinosaur. Let's skip that slide really quickly. And I'll just end with this last image. I was working at a school in Mumbai. We introduced a whole lot of maker technology to the kids, but first we spent about 15 minutes showing them how to program in turtle art as kind of a group fundamental experience. And then the kids could work with makey-makeys and little bits and 3D printers and Arduinos and all kinds of other gadgets. And they could choose their groups and they could giggle and they could be silly. But one little girl sat in the corner by herself, and she continued to program and program and program. And she ignored all of her friends and her classmates. It was almost an act of defiance. She spent 3 hours working on a program. She had never programmed computers before. And I'm so grateful to her for her sharing with me what she was working on. Because when you ran her program, the turtle drew the following. And it reminded me that when you're 15 years old, there's some stuff that matters more than the Pythagorean theorem. But there's a whole lot of geometry in there. And she was using that to serve something that mattered more to her. Papert used to quote Xenophon a lot, who said that nothing beautiful can ever be forced. Einstein said love is a better master than duty. So the last piece of advice I want to share with you, and it's the advice that I share with any audience that I have the privilege of speaking with anywhere in the world, and that is less us, more them. Anytime you think you should intervene on behalf of some educational transaction, it's worth asking the question, is there less that I can do and more that they can do? Because the more agency we transfer to the learner, the greater benefit they'll experience. So thank you very much for listening, for the work that you do on behalf of kids. It's terribly important, especially in these times. Thank you very much.